The most striking mental health indicator in this case is the apparent willingness to publish a children's book on coping with grief just months after the husband dies suddenly from a drug overdose, while authorities later alleged the death was not accidental. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and in this episode of The Clinical File, I'll examine the mental health indicators and the psychological layers of the Kouri Richins case. This analysis is based on my speculations. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. One behavior that stands out early is a decision to write and release a book titled, Are You With Me?, aimed at helping young children process the loss of a parent. The book appeared in late 2022, only months after Kouri Richins died. From a psychological perspective, this action raises questions about how someone processes sudden bereavement versus how they present the grief publicly. Grief can drive people to create memorials or share stories as coping mechanism. Yet the timing and content here invite closer examination of possible compartmentalization or image management. What makes this particularly compelling is the contrast between the public narrative of tragic loss and the private circumstances that investigators uncovered. Stay with me because we'll walk through the documented events, the financial pressures, and the substance involved, and what those elements might suggest about emotive, planning, and emotional regulation when viewed through a mental health lens. The jury selection began early in 2026 in Utah for Kouri Richins' trial. As of February 2026, the process of seating a jury is underway, with the full trial scheduled to start on February 23rd and expected to continue into late March. This marks a major update since charges were first filed, as the case has faced multiple delays, venue requests, and motions over the past few years. Kouri Richins faced charges of aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, insurance fraud, forgery, and related financial offenses. She has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Kouri Richins, a 39-year-old husband and father, died on March 4, 2022, at the family home in Utah. Authorities determined the cause of death was a fatal overdose involving fentanyl. Toxicology reports showed extremely high levels of fentanyl in the system, far exceeding the lethal dose. His gastric fluid also contained significant amounts of an antipsychotic medication sometimes used off-label for sleep or anxiety. Prosecutors alleged that Kouri Richins prepared a vodka drink for Kouri that night, laced with a lethal amount of fentanyl while the couple was at home celebrating a recent real estate closing. Kouri went to bed and never woke up. Investigators later pointed to an earlier incident on Valentine's Day in 2022, about 2 weeks before the fatal night. Court documents claim that Kouri Richins attempted to poison Kouri by placing fentanyl inside his favorite sandwich. Kouri reportedly ate only part of it and survived. From a psychological viewpoint, the idea of repeated attempts, if proven, points to a pattern of premeditation rather than a single impulsive act. Premeditation often involves sustained emotional detachment from the victim over time. In cases where someone allegedly plans harm against a close partner, we sometimes see a disassociation from empathy or a rationalization that allows the behavior to continue. The shift from an unsuccessful attempt to a successful one raises questions about escalation. What internal factors might allow someone to persist after the failed effort? Over time, cognitive dissonance could build, where the person adjusts their thinking to reduce guilt or discomfort, perhaps by reframing the act as necessary or inevitable. Financial strain appears central to the prosecution's narrative. Kouri Richins worked as a real estate agent and property flipper. Prosecutors state her business faced serious debt, and she stood on the edge of financial collapse in early 2022. Kouri reportedly held multiple life insurance policies, and documents allege Kouri changed beneficiary designations or secured new policies without his full knowledge or consent, naming herself to receive millions upon his death. This financial motive, when paired with the method chosen, suggests calculated risk assessment. Fentanyl is extremely potent, and sourcing it illegally carries its own dangers. Yet the choice of a drug overdose can create ambiguity, potentially allowing the death to be ruled accidental or medical at first glance. From a mental health perspective, individuals under extreme financial pressure sometimes enter a state of tunnel vision, where short-term survival overrides long-term consequences. This narrowing of focus can blunt normal moral reasoning. When desperation dominates, people may convince themselves that extreme actions are the only path forward, even when those actions destroy relationships and futures. The book itself becomes another layer here. Published shortly after Eric's death, it frames the loss as a sudden tragedy and offers gentle guidance for children. If the allegations hold, this act of writing and marketing such a book while allegedly responsible for the death could reflect compartmentalization at an extreme level. Compartmentalization allows someone to separate conflicting parts of their life, keeping guilt or awareness in one mental box while functioning in another. In therapy, we see this mechanism in people who maintain a public persona that contradicts private behavior. The strain of holding those contradictions can lead to anxiety, irritability, or even detachment over time. Prosecutors also point to insurance fraud allegations. They claim Kouri forged documents and misrepresented facts to obtain increased policies on Eric's life. If accurate, this behavior shows planning that extended beyond the immediate act. Forgery requires forethought, attention to detail, and a willingness to deceive institutions. Psychologically, chronic deception often ties to underlying issues with honesty and self-presentation. When someone repeatedly misrepresents reality to others, it can erode their internal sense of authenticity, creating a cycle where lies become the default coping tool. Kouri Richins was arrested in May 2023, roughly 13 months after Eric's death. She has remained in custody without bail since then, following multiple denied bail requests. Court records mention a letter found in her jail cell titled "Walk the Dog." Prosecutors allege it outlined suggested false testimony for family members. If true, this suggests ongoing efforts to shape the narrative even after arrest. From a psychological angle, attempts to influence witnesses can reflect difficulty accepting accountability or a persistent need to control the outcomes. This behavior sometimes appears in people who struggle with external locus of control, where events feel unbearable unless manipulated. Throughout the pretrial phase, defense attorneys have filed motions to move the trial out of Summit County, citing media coverage and legal prejudice. Those requests have been denied multiple times, including as recently as February 2026. The defense has also challenged certain expert witnesses, including limitations on testimony from a former FBI profiler. No public information indicates Kouri Richins has raised a formal mental health defense, such as a diminished capacity or insanity. Discussions in media and podcasts have speculated about possible claims, but nothing has been confirmed in court filings. Any medication records or evaluations remain private unless introduced at trial. As a counselor, I note that sudden, unexplained deaths like this one affect entire families and communities. The 3 young sons lost their father, then faced their mother's arrest and prolonged legal process. The psychological impact on children in these situations can include prolonged grief, confusion about trust, and attachment disruptions. Support for surviving children often focuses on creating stability, validating emotions, and helping them separate the adult conflict from their own worth. The method of fentanyl poisoning carries its own psychological weight. Fentanyl overdoses can appear peaceful from the outside, but for someone considering this path, the lack of visible violence might reduce immediate guilt compared to more confrontational means. This detachment from the physical reality of harm is something we see in cases involving poison or indirect methods. The timeline shows a progression: alleged attempt in February, success in March, book release later that year, arrest in 2023, and now a trial in 2026. Each step required sustained effort. Maintaining that effort over years suggests a high degree of emotional regulation, or perhaps suppression, to keep functioning every day. If the allegations are accurate, the case illustrates how financial desperation, perceived lack of options, and rationalized planning can intersect. Desperation does not excuse the behavior, but it does help explain how someone might reach a point where harming a partner feels like the only solution. If this case made you pause and think about how pressure can distort decision-making, then subscribe before I start analyzing my dog next. Just kidding. Mostly. This case is so ironic here. Kouri was the author of a book for children about grief. The book was published after her husband was killed. She has been accused of his death after she published this book about grief. And her children are grieving. Do you see the ironic part of this? It's almost like it's a fictional book, but it's not. This is reality. This is true crime. So what elements of this case stood out to you? And why do you think this happened? Do you think it was a financial strain or maybe something else? Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.